and as you know, the infantry was more or less the up front all the time. I think I'd like to tell the uniform we wore. It isn't quite like you see it in the news. We wore a pair of packs and OD clothes, and we didn't carry a big pack on your back like you normally see. All we wore was a shelter half. We just strapped over our back, over our belt, and that's what we used to cover with at night if we had to get a chance to sleep. And we didn't have a chow hall to go to or anything like that. They'd just give us a little box of K rations once or twice a day. And we naturally carried a rifle with us all the time, and the enemy was generally just ahead of us. The main army was just a ways ahead of us, and our main army was just, you know, just a little ways apart. And the infantry was more or less in between. They would, and well, we would try to infiltrate into their lines, and they would do the same to ours. And but 90% of our fighting was in towns. They would occupy a town, and we'd be just maybe one town away from like 8, 10 miles or something like that. And a lot of times they were on the defensive, or they were retreating. So when they left the town, they didn't just pull up and leave the town. They would leave a few soldiers there, and our job was to go and clean them soldiers out. The reason for leaving a few soldiers was to delay us. They would they were like spotters. Whenever we came into town, they would tell their troops behind them where to drop the shells. So we had to go in and clear them out. And it was kind of tricky. They would pick some pretty hectic spots, like maybe they'd be up in a church tower or something like that, kind of hard to spot. I'd like to tell a few cases what happened to us. One time we went into a town. It was a fairly good sized town, and we was going through all the houses, and all at once I come to a house, and there was two of us generally together, and a nun came out, and I could tell the way she acted. She well, kind of didn't want to say that they were in there, and she wouldn't just say yes or no. And I could communicate with her a little bit. She could talk a little Latin, I guess, and I had been in the army in Panama and picked up a little Spanish, so we were able to communicate a little bit. But when I'd say solda, which everybody knew what it was, she couldn't understand that at all. And finally, another nun come kind of out and talked to her, and she said something to her, and so she went back in, and sure enough, 3 German soldiers come out and surrendered to us. But then the nun, she understood what solda meant. She let us know that she understood. One other time, we was in a village, and generally a village was empty when we came to it. Not altogether, but pretty well empty. And we come to this one house, and a guy, he came to the door. See, the doors were always unlocked. It was a rule. I don't know who told them, but they weren't supposed to lock their doors ever. So we came to the door, and a guy come out, and oh, there's no solda, no solda. And he was just acting too positive about it, you know. And the guy that was with me, he picked up a wine bottle, an empty wine bottle standing by the door with a cork in it. and he threw it as hard as he could down the basement, and that thing cracked like a grenade going off. 4 German soldiers come out with their hands up, comrade, comrade. So there was a lot of that kind of stuff. I mean, you never knew when they were going to, we knew that there was always soldiers there, because anytime we went in a house, that is the house that the Germans hit. Because they were pretty conservative with their ammunition. They would always hit the house we were in. Like one house we went in, there's about 6 of us, I think, in this house, and about 3 went in one room, and then there was another room, and there was a back room. And just lucky we were all not in the middle room, and all at once a German 88 came right through there and smashed right into the house. If we'd have been in that room, we'd have probably got all of us. So that's kind of the type of fighting we were doing, an awful lot of it. And that's what more or less happened when the time I got, the time I got wounded, I guess. We were going into a town, and a lot of these towns were real small. They were like a farming town where the people lived in the town and they farmed on the outside. And we were supposed to go into this town, and technically it was supposed to be a pretty good sized town. And we were going to the town, and all at once there stood a tank right in our way, maybe about 100 or 200 yards ahead of us. And well, no way soldiers with just a rifle was going to compete with a tank. And I was in the lead. I was squad leader. See, your squad leader more or less took the lead. And so I seen the tank, and I hollered at the guys, go over to the tin shack over there. And I no more than did that, and wham, he let me have it. I don't know just where the shell landed, either right in front of me or just between my legs or whatever. And it just picked me up and threw me up in the air, and just covered me with mud. And normally, the type of shell they were using were the type that would throw out a lot of shrapnel, and it was supposed to get me. And for some reason, I was just in the blank spot. And so I just laid there, played possum, and the tank, he didn't shoot at me no more, and the other guys, they all run to that building. And so I laid there a while, and the tank, he just stayed there, and all at once I just jumped up and ran as fast as I could to the building, because there was a lot of grass and weeds, tall weeds and stuff. The other guys went behind the building, and I just got to this close pile of weeds. And I was just kind of watching. I could see the tank, and I didn't think he could see me. And all of a sudden, he let loose with one, and it landed, maybe 25 feet from me, or 20 or so. But that time, I had my rifle in my hand, and I was kind of squatted. Had my rifle in my hand, and I was kind of squatting. I don't remember just exactly how. But one piece of shrapnel came, and he just cut the tip of my knuckle on my hand, and the other one caught me right in here, and it just tore my pants from my crotch down to the end of the boot, and I had 2 pair of pants on and long johns, and it just tore them, just gapped them wide open, and it left a little cut on my knee. That damn shrapnel, it ain't just a piece of square metal. It's torn metal. It just explodes, and it just tears, and they probably like inch in diameter. They're all different sizes, of course, but maybe like an inch and a half in diameter, and they're like a star or something. Just dozens of just sharp needle sharp points on them, and they would just. Well, if they'd hit you in the gut or something, they'd just do a number of them. And it's just lucky it hit me here and here. Well, in the tank, he stayed there a little while, and well, I had to a bandage up my knee, and we carried with us we carried with us a canteen for water and a little first aid kit, just for that purpose, I guess. And it had sulfa and band-aids, and not band-aids, but gauze and safety pins and stuff like that. So I took and started to patch myself up, and all once the tank took off. And after I got patched up good enough, I thought, well, now I'll go join the gang. They were behind this shack. And I listened, and I couldn't hear a sound. You know, they were already gone. So I thought, well, they went into this town. And so I thought, well, I'll just walk into town and catch up to them. And come to find out, I was walking practically down the street, and all of a sudden there the tank was up a couple blocks ahead. And I said, that ain't an American tank. You know, I mean, I knew it didn't have a star on it, had the old swastika more or less. And so I ducked into a building and got down into the basement, and it happened to be a big wine cellar. It was bigger than pretty any of them I'd ever, well, the biggest one that ever was in. It was like he was probably a merchant or something. And so it wasn't long, see, when I spotted them, they spotted me. So, but they didn't know which building I went into. So they come down, and a couple German officers walking alongside the tank, and they were shouting up into the buildings, you know. You could tell they were trying to find out where I was, you know. And so I just kind of stayed back in the shadows. And these buildings over there, all of them, they're built with probably that much rock and concrete. You know, their basements are just like a fort, you know. But they went right on by me, and finally went up there, and they shot into a pile of hay up there where they figured some of our guys were, and they shoot these tracer bullets into it, and it started on fire. But it wasn't long, he come back, and so then it started getting late, and so I decided, well, I'll stay here until morning and see what happens. And so I slept down in that wine cellar, and by the way, it's the only place I ever found good wine over there. I didn't drink that much, but most of the wine is just so tart that you just can't hardly drink it. It's a dinner wine or something. But here you had some white wine in one cake. And I just, well, hadn't eaten or anything, so I was doing it more for food value or for a little heat, because it was cold. And so next morning, all of a sudden a kid came down, maybe 8, 10 years old or something like that. And he spotted me down there, and he cuts back and goes upstairs. And then the old man comes down, and boy, he was mad. He was shouting at me in German or French or whatever. I think it was German. But not that I was down there so much. I don't think it's just the fact that the Germans were in town, and he didn't want to be caught with an American down in his basement. So he kept bitching, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should let him chase me out or not. And I thought, well, I'll take a look out. So I kind of looked to see if there was any Germans around on the street or anything like that. And I thought, well, rather than put up with him, I'll take off and go to another place. So I went across the street just a little ways and ducked into there's actually a barn. But see, over there, a lot of the houses and barns are all hooked together. So I went in the barn, and there stood one cow. And so I said, oh boy, breakfast. So I took my old canteen cup out, and milked the cow, and had warm milk for breakfast. And so also I heard something coming, and there was a couple of young kids again, and they were coming to milk that cow. And well, after the cow was milked, well, she wasn't going to give them much more. So you could hear them. You could tell that they were bitching. The cow ain't giving milk right. Or the fact that, well, I had milked enough that the cow wouldn't give her milk down twice is what it amounts to, I guess. And so well, I seen that they weren't going to hurt me, so I kind of hid when I heard them coming. And so they were friendly, and they said, talking in sign language and everything. Finally, they said Essen. Well, Essen I knew meant eat in German, so I said sure. So they went back and they brought me a sandwich of some kind. I don't remember, but it hit the spot. And finally, one of them said something about solda. And I said, well, if it's going to be a German soldier, I might as well give up. I knew it was just either way I was captured or whatever. So once they came back, and there they had a couple of American soldiers. They knew where they were and everything. They went and got them. And these soldiers were with a tank outfit. And so they took me back to their outfit. See, the Germans pulled out during the night, and they took me back to their outfit and give me new clothes and stuff and something to eat. And they said, well, you been to a medic to have the wounds fixed up? And I said, no, they'll be all right. And the officer said, well, it's worth about 5 points to you, for if you get for getting the Purple Heart. Well, to me, I was more interested in getting out of the Army, but 5 points, I don't know, most of you probably don't realize, they give you got points for every month you was over there, and for a wound you got so many points, and if you got you got like maybe 80 points or something like that, you'd be the first one to go, and the guy with the 70 points would go second, and that stuff. So I thought, well, sure, for 5 points, I'll go down and have the medic look at it. So I did that, and finally I asked them if they would take me to my outfit, if they could figure out where my outfit was. And they said, yeah, we can figure that out. So they put me up on a tank, and we went back to my outfit and got back with them, and they just about died. They said they knew I was dead. The guy that was right behind me, he said, see, when they come to the back of that shack, somebody asked him, well, where's Pete? Oh, the Germans got him. I seen him flying through the air. They got him. They never come back to look to see if I was dead or not. They knew I was blowed up. So so they were just about getting ready to go on another excursion, but this was going to be a little different than what we had been doing. Here, well, it happened more or less right after the Battle of the Bulge, and the United States took a pretty good beating on that. So we lost a lot of men and equipment and stuff, so they were taking men out of our unit and taking them and kind of putting them in the unit that got beat up so bad. And so we weren't advancing, and the Germans were more or less advancing. So they were in one town, and there was a town in between, and the Germans were, and we were back in another town. So we took and went into this town, but more as spotters for our artillery, or to let our company know when the Germans were coming. And we took and we had about 3-4 men in each group, and we went in 3 different houses. And the Germans had been coming, kind of checking to see just exactly what house we were in and everything. And so that night, also, the Germans decided to move the whole division to town. So they came in, and first thing they were going to do, they sent about maybe a company of men, like would be like 100 men or so, up and surround these houses that we were, each one of us were in, or each group was in. They'd set up a mortar and machine gun and stuff like that, and generally make you surrender, you know. And well, see, when I got into this house, they had the house that they were in out about, maybe 3-4 blocks further out of town. So I moved the group into right next to the outskirts of the town. And so the Germans didn't know that we moved. So they were going right on by us and going to go down to this house where we were in. And I was on guard at the time, and another guy was on guard. And all at once I heard this noise coming, and it didn't sound like soldiers for some reason, but they had mortars and stuff. There was chains of making noise, and I thought it was some farmer out there trying to water his cow or something. You know, it just didn't sound right. And all at once we realized it was, so we shot into the group, and boy, we no more than did. And I tell you, they opened up on us, and I was just standing out in front of the house, and there was a little cement post about this big, and I knew that wasn't going to protect me, so I run to the barn, and the other guy, he was already by the barn, and as I was running to the barn, the slivers just kept flying off of the door. You know, they were shooting through that door. How I made it through there, I don't know. Well, after we was in there, they wouldn't just up and shoot necessarily unless they seen us, and so we didn't know what to do. And there was snow on the ground. We knew they could track us if we got out. And we looked upstairs in the barn. There was a little pile of hay, probably about a load of loose hay up there, and knew that wouldn't protect us. So I walked kind of around the back of the barn, and finally on one side of the barn, and the barn, by the way, had probably never been painted. It was pretty black, gray. And there was some posts leaning up against it. So I took the guy with me, and I said, let's just lean right against this thing. Our clothes will blend right in. And sure enough, the son of a guns, they would walk around us, within 3-4 feet of us. They were looking out in the snow and stuff, and they never seen us. And we just stood there, and it was cold. When you stand still, you just get cold. And so wasn't long, all at once the Americans started shelling the town. So, see, the American shell can kill you just as fast as the German shell. So, but they were just shelling the town, and so as soon as they did, then the Germans, they were wise enough, they went down in the basement of the house. And in the meantime, they had already cleaned out the house. They picked up the other guys, they were sleeping, and they were they were threatening to kill them, for they thought they were the ones that shot into their group. And no, they kind of convinced them that they weren't, they were sleeping. Finally, when the shelling, while it was still shelling, I decided, now, they've already been up in that hay mow, they probably won't go back up in there. So, me and the other guy, we went back and we crawled into the hay, and pretty soon the shelling stopped enough, and finally you could hear the Germans down there digging around. They had forks and stuff pounding, trying to find out where we were. And I was cold and everything in that dusty hay, and I started to cough. And I tell you, I tried my darnest to keep from coughing, but there's no way. I just had to cough. And they were down in the basement, and they were trying to figure out where it was coming from, and finally they come up in the barn. Well, then I knew the jig was up. I didn't want them shooting through the hay again, so I just surrendered. And they started questioning us then too, were you the guns that shot into us? And the guy that found us up in the barn, he says, no, they swung you or something like that. No, they were asleep up in the hay. They he saved our life, because they didn't take too friendly to a guy that just up and shot him, you know what I mean? So if they knew who it was. So we got sent back to a prison camp there. But that guy, he I don't know where he figured them other guys were that done the shooting, but he stood up for us and probably saved our life. But then I think you probably want to hear more or less about the prison camp. So we finally got back to the prison. They walked us quite a ways, and then we got on in boxcars and finally ended up at Limburg, Germany. And the prison camp itself only held around a little over 200 probably, but there was generally around 200 Americans there. And it was barbed wire, of course, all around it. And they told us it was electric wires and stuff, but I don't believe it really was. It may have been. But they had soldiers with dogs walking around it pretty constant. And we were locked in. I think around 9 o'clock at night they would lock us in the thing. And you know, in each barracks. And the barracks, you slept on the floor, and they give us one of their overcoats. The German overcoat looked a lot like the American overcoat. You know, I mean, it's only a little different color. But that's all we had to cover with. And it was cold, but not just that awful bad. And well, I suppose you'd like to hear about the food. So the food, they would once a day they would give us a coffee and bread. The coffee was made out of burnt barley or roasted barley or whatever, and they would make a sort of a coffee out of that. And the bread was made out of sawdust that had been treated with some sort of a chemical to make it more palatable, or not necessarily more palatable, but digestible or something. And they mixed a little bit of potato flour with that, and they baked that, and that was your bread. And they'd give you a little chunk. Like one guy asked me how big a chunk, and I said, oh, about a 2x4. But it was just, it was so hard that one time I took and left a chunk of that bread lay in that coffee overnight, and the next morning I could just barely scrape, you know, with my fingernail. I could scrape what was loose, you know, so it didn't soak in, oh, a 32nd of an inch or so. So you just had to kind of chew on, gnaw at it. And but then for supper or the second meal, they had dehydrated sugar beet tops. Somebody said they were getting them from Australia or Argentina. They were dehydrated. They was generally considered cattle food. You know, it was just dried up sugar beet tops, and a little bit of barley, pearl barley was in it, and that was about all there was. And they would make kind of a soup out of that, and they would give us each, you know, a portion. They had a dipper each, everybody got the same amount. And then once a week, and I suppose it was Sunday, but you know, days didn't mean much there. It was Saturday or Sunday. But they would give us a meatball. It's not as big as a golf ball, but you know, close to that. A raw horse meat, ground up horse meat. And you had no way of cooking it or anything like that. I don't know why they just didn't throw it in with the soup, but they would give you, each one of you got a little meatball and 2 cigarettes. Just enough to keep you in the habit. But them cigarettes were really appreciated. They got to be worth, they were the money of the camp. In other words, if you were going to buy something or sell something, it was always a cigarette or half a cigarette or something like that. Or so no, we figured one cigarette was worth probably, for monetary purposes, would be worth probably from $20 to $100. You know, you could buy a good gold watch from a guy if he happened to have it for a cigarette. You know. But still, other things, like I had to give a cigarette to get a haircut, you know, so it was just kind of odd the way it worked out. And, but then diarrhea is what really got me down, and it got a lot of guys down, majority. Some of them didn't last. There was guys come there I know that weren't alive 10 days after they got